4,312 ships. That was the number stamped on the Coalition's official manifest, the largest fleet ever assembled in recorded galactic history, bigger than the armada that ended the Threscian Wars, bigger than the force that pacified the Outer Drift. It was sent to conquer one planet. Earth. Fleet Commander Eressa Duel stood on the bridge of the flagship Absolute Verdict and watched the blue-green world grow larger on her view screen, and she felt nothing close to doubt. Why would she? The math was simple. Overwhelming force against a species barely 2 centuries into space travel. This wasn't a battle. This was paperwork with explosions. Entering orbital range, her navigator reported. No hostile signatures detected. Duel frowned slightly. That was strange. Human defense grids should have lit up the moment they crossed the outer marker buoys. Scan again, she ordered. Same result, Commander. No weapons fire. No fighter launches. No comm chatter at all. Something about the silence made the hair on her arms rise, and she didn't know why, because silence should have meant weakness, should have meant an easy victory. It didn't feel like that. It felt like walking into a room where everyone had already stopped talking about you right before you opened the door. 3 days earlier, 4,000 light-years away, the Coalition High Command had made their decision in a chamber far smaller and far less ceremonial than the Council's grand halls. This wasn't a diplomatic body. This was a war council, cold and efficient, made up of species who had learned centuries ago that mercy was a resource, not a virtue. Earth has refused 3 separate resource-sharing agreements, General Torvain said, tapping a claw against the star map. Their rare mineral deposits alone are worth more than 6 colonized systems combined. They've also refused every attempt at diplomatic contact regarding territorial boundaries, added another officer. 2 research vessels went dark near their outer colonies 18 months ago. Duel had read those reports herself. Officially, cause unknown. Unofficially, everyone assumed pirates or equipment failure. Nobody in that room considered a third option. A junior analyst near the back of the chamber, a Threscian named Voss, had actually raised his hand once, hesitant, half-formed. What if the vessels weren't lost to accident or piracy? What if Earth? He didn't get to finish. Torvain cut him off with a look sharp enough to end the sentence on its own, and Voss sat back down, and nobody brought it up again. Later, long after the fleet had already launched, people would remember that moment and wonder how differently things might have gone if someone had simply let him finish. They're weak, Torvain continued. Barely 200 years into interstellar travel. No Council allies willing to intervene militarily on their behalf. This is the cleanest conquest opportunity in a generation. Duel had raised one objection, just one. If they're this weak, why send the entire 2nd and 4th fleets combined? Why not a scouting force first? Torvain's answer had been simple, almost bored. Because we don't leave anything to chance anymore. Overwhelming force ends wars before they start. She should have pushed harder. She didn't. Later, alone in her quarters aboard the Absolute Verdict, Duel pulled up everything the Coalition actually had on Earth, not the summary briefing, the raw data. It wasn't much. A handful of trade intercepts. Some grainy long-range scans of orbital shipyards. A few outdated reports from Council contacts who hadn't visited the system in over a year. That was it. That was the entire intelligence picture behind a war involving 4,000 ships. She flagged the gap to Torvain directly, in writing, because she wanted it on record. Recommend delaying deployment pending updated reconnaissance. Current intelligence is insufficient for a force of this scale. His reply came back within the hour, brief and final. Request denied. Timeline is fixed. Proceed as ordered. She read it twice, then closed the file, because there was nothing left to argue. Orders were orders, and the coalition didn't reward officers who second-guessed high command, even when the second-guessing turned out to be right. She didn't sleep well that night. She told herself it was nerves before a major campaign. Every commander felt that, didn't they? A tightness in the chest before the largest engagement of their career. It wasn't nerves. It was instinct, the kind honed over decades of command, quietly screaming at her that something about this entire operation didn't add up, and she was choosing not to listen. That decision would haunt every survivor of the coalition fleet for the rest of their lives, however short those lives turned out to be. The Armada crossed into Earth's outer defense perimeter without incident. No warning shots. No intercepting patrols. Just empty space and the growing shape of a planet that, according to every intelligence report Duel had ever read, should not have been able to defend itself against a force this size. "Commander," her communications officer said, voice tight, "we're picking up a transmission. Single source, Earth's surface origin. Put it through." The voice that came through wasn't panicked. It wasn't pleading. It was almost, unsettlingly, polite. "Coalition fleet, this is Earth orbital control. You are entering restricted airspace without authorization. Please reverse course immediately." Duel actually laughed. A single, unarmed planet, telling the largest armada in galactic history to turn around. "Denied," she said, and cut the channel. "Proceed to standard orbital formation. Begin surface scan for primary population centers." "Copy that, Commander. Formation in 3 minutes." 3 minutes. That was how much time the coalition fleet had left before everything they understood about this war turned out to be wrong. What Duel didn't know, what none of the 4,312 ships in her armada knew, was that Earth had been watching them for 6 days already. Not with satellites. Not with patrol ships. With something the coalition had never encountered before, because no species in this sector had ever needed to build it. A network of stealth relay drones, scattered across a dozen systems along the most probable invasion routes, silent, unarmed, and completely invisible to every scanning technology in coalition service, because human engineers had designed them specifically to defeat those exact scanning frequencies. The project had started almost by accident, 8 months earlier, when Earth's intelligence division noticed unusual coalition probe activity along 3 separate border systems. Nothing conclusive. Just enough irregular traffic to make Amara's soul uneasy, and Amara had learned a long time ago to trust that particular kind of unease. "We're not waiting to find out if this is nothing," she'd told Keller at the time. "If it's nothing, we've wasted some resources on drones. If it's something, we need eyes out there we can trust." Keller had approved the project in 11 minutes, a record for a proposal that size. Within 6 months, Earth had a passive observation network stretching further than any coalition scout had ever bothered to check, because no coalition scout had ever imagined a species this young would think to look that far in advance. By the time the coalition fleet crossed into range, Earth had already tracked their staging, their fuel patterns, their formation drills, everything, down to the exact number of ships in the final armada. 4,312. Earth had known that number for 9 days before the coalition fleet ever arrived. Admiral Keller, 6 months removed from a council chamber that now treated Earth with something close to respect, sat in a command bunker 300 meters below the surface and watched the coalition fleet's approach vector update in real time. "They're not slowing down," his tactical officer said. "Full formation, no scouts, no reconnaissance sweep. They think this is a straight conquest." "Good," Keller said quietly. "Let them keep thinking that." Amara Sol stood beside him, arms crossed, watching the same display with an expression that wasn't quite a smile, but was close. 4,000 ships, she said. "That's almost insulting, honestly." We built defenses for something twice that size. Show a little humility, Keller said, though his voice carried no real rebuke. Humility didn't build a planetary shield lattice out of Kryvan energy theory, Amara said. Confidence did. The Coalition fleet dropped into standard orbital formation exactly as planned. Precise. Textbook. The kind of formation you used when you expected zero resistance. That was their first mistake. Commander, the tactical officer aboard the Absolute Verdict said, voice suddenly uncertain, sensor readings are fluctuating. I'm seeing distortion patterns across the entire fleet. Define distortion, Duel said, moving toward the display. I don't know how to define it, ma'am. It's like the space around us is being measured. Mapped. In real time. A chill crawled up Duel's spine, the first genuine fear she'd felt since accepting this command. Pull back to a defensive perimeter, she ordered. Now. Too late. The planetary shield lattice, built in secret over the past 6 months using principles no Coalition scientist had ever theorized, didn't fire a single shot. It didn't need to. It simply activated, a dome of folded space stretching from Earth's surface out past the entire Coalition formation, and every ship inside the dome found its long-range communications severed instantly, completely, without warning. 4,312 ships, and every single one of them just went silent to the outside galaxy at once. Report, Duel demanded, watching her own bridge crew scramble at consoles that suddenly weren't responding the way they should. Communications are down, Commander. All channels. Long range, short range, everything. Engines? Functional, but... Commander, I'm reading energy drain across the entire fleet. Something's pulling power directly from our reactors. Duel's hands tightened on the edge of her command chair. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't in any threat assessment, any intelligence briefing, any wargame scenario the Coalition had ever run. Identify the source, she snapped. A long pause. Too long. Commander, the source isn't a weapon. It's not attacking us. It's just watching. Studying our systems in real time. I don't understand what we're looking at. Neither did Duel. And that terrified her more than any weapon ever could have. Across the fleet, the same scene repeated on 4,000 different bridges. Crews staring at consoles that suddenly made no sense. Officers running diagnostics that came back clean, over and over, because nothing was actually broken, everything simply wasn't theirs to control anymore. On the Vigilant Ascent, 3 ships down from the flagship, a junior weapons officer named Keswick watched his targeting array flicker uselessly and felt something he'd never expected to feel on the day of the galaxy's greatest military triumph. Small. Completely, thoroughly small. He wasn't alone. Across the dome, 4,000 crews were learning the same lesson at the same moment, that overwhelming numbers meant nothing against a species that had simply decided not to let the fight happen the way everyone assumed it would. Some of them started praying, to whatever gods their homeworlds still recognized. Some simply sat in silence, staring at consoles that no longer answered them, waiting for orders that wouldn't come for hours yet. And a few, the sharpest ones, already understood exactly what this meant for the rest of their careers, that they'd be remembered, if they were remembered at all, as the crews who sailed into the trap nobody saw coming, on a mission nobody had bothered to question until it was already far, far too late. On the surface, Keller watched energy readouts stream across his display, each one representing a Coalition ship now completely isolated from its command structure, unable to call for reinforcements, unable to coordinate, unable to do anything except sit inside a dome of folded space and wait. They still have weapons, his tactical officer said. Full offensive capability. If they panic and start firing. They won't, Keller said. Not yet.
Right now they're trying to understand what happened. Panic comes after understanding fails. And if understanding does fail? Keller didn't answer right away.
Instead, he opened a channel, broadcasting directly into the isolated dome where 4,000 ships sat trapped in blind.
Coalition Fleet, this is Earth Defense Command. You are currently contained within a controlled zone.
Your weapons remain functional. Your engines remain functional. What you no longer have is the ability to call for help, coordinate a retreat, or report your position to anyone outside this dome.
Silence answered him for nearly 10 seconds. Then Duel's voice came through, tight and controlled, but unmistakably shaken. This is Fleet Commander Duel. What do you want? Right now?
Keller said.
Just a conversation.
You came here to conquer a planet you assumed was defenseless. I think it's worth discussing why that assumption was wrong before this turns into something neither of us wants. The negotiation, if you could call it that, lasted 6 hours.
Duel argued. She threatened.
At one point, she ordered a single squadron to test fire on an empty stretch of orbital space, just to prove her fleet's weapons still worked.
They did.
The shots fired perfectly fine, streaking out from the squadron's cannons in clean, textbook arcs, exactly the way weapons training said they should. They just never reached their target, absorbed instead by a secondary field none of the coalition's sensors had even detected existed, the energy simply folding away into nothing a few hundred meters past the ship's hull, like the void itself had quietly decided not to let the shot continue. The squadron commander who'd ordered the test went pale and requested to be relieved of duty less than 10 minutes later.
Duel let him go.
She understood exactly how he felt.
By hour 4, Duel stopped threatening.
By hour 5, she started asking real questions. Somewhere in hour 3, she'd ordered a full diagnostic on every ship in the fleet, hoping to find some flaw in the containment field, some gap she could exploit.
The diagnostics came back clean.
Whatever Earth had built, it wasn't held together by luck or improvisation. It was precise, layered, and completely without weakness anywhere her engineers could find. That was when the fear really settled in.
Not the fear of losing a battle.
The fear of realizing there wasn't a battle to lose, because Earth had never intended to fight one in the first place.
How is this possible? She finally asked. A species 200 years into space travel doesn't build technology like this. We don't follow anyone else's timeline, Keller said. That's usually the mistake everyone makes about us.
You measured us against how long you've had spaceflight. You should have measured us against how fast we solve problems once we actually need to.
And if we refuse to stand down?
Then you sit inside the dome until your life support runs out, Keller said, voice flat and unhurried.
We're not in a rush.
4,000 ships is a lot of very patient hostages, Commander.
I'd rather this end with everyone going home. But that decision isn't really mine to make anymore.
It's yours.
Duel stared at the tactical display for a long time after the channel closed. 4,312 ships. The largest armada in coalition history. Completely, silently, helplessly trapped by a species everyone back home had called weak. She thought about Torvain's words. Overwhelming force ends wars before they start. He'd been right, in a way. Just not the way he meant. Commander, her communications officer said quietly, orders?
Duel closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, and made the only decision that gave her fleet, and her people, any chance of surviving what came next.
Signal full stand down, she said. All weapons offline. All engines to minimal power. Tell Earth Defense Command we're ready to negotiate terms. It was the hardest order she'd ever given, and somehow, also the easiest.
3 days later, the the dome lifted, ship by ship, in a carefully staged sequence that let each coalition vessel re-establish contact with home only after formal surrender terms were signed. When Coalition High Command finally received word of what had happened, the silence in their war chamber lasted almost as long as the silence Earth itself had endured during the Armada's approach. 4,312 ships sent to conquer one planet. All 4,312 returned home eventually, which was, in its own way, more unsettling to the wider galaxy than if none of them had. Because a species that could have destroyed an entire invading armada, and chose instead to simply contain it, negotiate with it, and send it home intact, wasn't a species anyone wanted to underestimate again. Word spread fast after that, faster than any official coalition report could control. Not just that Earth had survived the largest armada ever assembled. That Earth hadn't even needed to fight it. General Torvain resigned his post 11 days after the fleet's return, though resigned was the word used in the official record. Duel heard rumors it was closer to a forced removal, quiet and unceremonious, the kind reserved for commanders whose miscalculations were too large to explain away. She didn't feel satisfaction hearing it. Just a tired kind of relief, the sort that comes after surviving something you were never supposed to survive. 6 months later, Duel received an unmarked transmission, source encrypted beyond anything coalition systems could trace. She almost deleted it. Curiosity won. It was a single line, from Keller himself. You made the right call. Most commanders in your position wouldn't have. She stared at it for a long time before responding. Would you have destroyed us if I'd refused to stand down? The reply took almost a full day to arrive, longer than she expected. We'll never know now, will we? That's rather the point of choosing peace before you have to find out. She never got a clearer answer than that. She never asked again either. Because some questions, she'd learned, were better left exactly where Earth had left them. Unanswered, and very, very far away. The end.